All right, so last week we studied the chosen people when God waited for a man named Abraham to come along that would obey exactly what he said. And he was going to start a work through him through a new covenant, a promise that he gave to Abraham. We know we crossed into a new dispensation, that being the dispensation of the patriarchs, or some people call it promise. Dispensation is just a period of time in which God deals with man in a particular way. And so Abraham followed the Lord. We talked a little bit about how he had a son named Ishmael first, but that was not the promised child because that was a human plan that was crafted to try to help God along and caused a lot of chaos in the process. And that eventually, when it was God's time, 25 years after the promise was given, God did give Abraham and Sarah a child named Isaac. And so some time goes on, Abraham has Isaac, and now Isaac has two sons named Esau and Jacob, and that's where we're going to pick up. Genesis 25, verse 19 says, "This is the genealogy of Isaac, Abraham's son. Abraham begot Isaac. Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah as his wife, the son of Bethuel, the Syrian of Padan Aram, the sister of Laban the Syrian. Now Isaac pleaded with the Lord for his wife because she was barren. And the Lord granted his plea, and Rebekah his wife conceived. But the children struggled together within her. And she said, 'If all is well, why am I like this?' So she went to inquire of the Lord." I love that. It's just, it makes you wonder if things were a little bit different that way. When people prayed back then, I don't know, because God speaks to her right away and talks to her. And verse 23, "And the Lord said to her, 2 nations are in your womb. 2 people shall be separated from your body. 1 people shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger." That was really important because in those days, and we're mainly talking about boys, the oldest was always the one to inherit, right? They got the birthright. They were first. But the Lord said, they're struggling within your womb. These twins are struggling. And the older, the one that comes out first, is actually going to end up serving the younger. Verse 24, "So when her days were fulfilled for her to give birth, indeed there were twins in her womb. And the first came out red. He was like a hairy garment all over. So they called his name Esau. Afterward, his brother came out." Verse 24, "So when her days were fulfilled for her to give birth, indeed there were twins in her womb. And the first came out red. He was like a hairy garment all over. So they called his name Esau. Afterward, his brother came out, and his hand took hold of Esau's heel. So his name was called Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when she bore them. So the boys grew, and Esau was a skillful hunter, a man of the field, but Jacob was a mild man dwelling in tents. And Isaac loved Esau because he ate of his game, but Rebekah loved Jacob." So once again, we're going to get sibling rivalry involved. We're going to get a favorite that are chosen by the parents. Verse 29, "Now Jacob cooked a stew, and Esau came in from the field, and he was weary. And Esau said to Jacob, 'Please feed me with that same red stew, for I am weary.' Therefore his name was called Edom. But Jacob said, 'Sell me your birthright as of this day.' And Esau said, 'Look, I'm about to die, so what is this birthright to me?' Then Jacob said, 'Swear to me as of this day.' So he swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. And Jacob gave Esau bread and stew of lentils. Then he ate and drank, arose and went his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright." So Jacob was the second-born twin. But remember, God had said the older is going to serve the younger. So what should have happened is Esau should have been the one to get the birthright, which originally it was set up that way. But Jacob is going to come out, and he's actually got a name that means supplanter, conniver. Somebody that's going to con his way through. That was what Jacob really was. And so a good brother, when you think about this, now time has gone on. Jacob likes to stay home with mama, wants to be inside, doesn't want to get his hands dirty. doesn't want to really be a man of the field, but Esau was that kind of a rugged guy, and he loved to hunt. And so it was time to go get some meat. Ran out and got some, came back from a hunt. And what's interesting to me is he must have come upon Jacob at a point where he was still far enough away from the house that he couldn't just say, well, in 5 minutes I'll be home. I'll keep my birthright. So Jacob had obviously planned to meet Esau at a crucial moment when he knew his brother would be exhausted and famished. And he set out there and made this beautiful smelling stew, knowing Esau was going to come there. It wasn't a mistake that he was there at that spot that day. And Jacob knew exactly what the sale price would be. It was, I want your birthright. Now, to Esau, it was, well, what's my birthright to me if I don't even make it home? If I die of hunger before I get there, it's no good to me. I might as well eat. And probably in his mind, he's going to think, your word against mine, bro. Who's dad going to believe? He's never going to believe the conniver. And so Esau thought he could get away with this probably, but the fact was God was watching. God knew what had happened. Esau despised his birthright. He didn't care about it enough. So much so that he sold it for a bowl of beans, which is really what happened. And he sold that birthright, and God saw it. Chapter 27, verses 1 through 5. Now it came to pass when Isaac was old, and his eyes were so dim that he could not see, that he called Esau his older son, and said to him, my son. And he answered him, here I am. Then he said, behold, now I am old. I do not know the day of my death. Now therefore please take your weapons, your quiver and your bow, and go out to the field and hunt game for me. And make me savory food such as I love, and bring it to me, that I may eat, that my soul may bless you before I die. Verse 5, now Rebekah was listening when Isaac spoke to Esau his son, and Esau went to the field to hunt and bring back the game. So Isaac is now preparing to pass the blessing, and he's expecting to give that to Esau because he apparently had never heard the story of the birthright being sold. And now Esau heads right out because he's not going to tell dad, right? To him, it never happened. Mm-hmm. He's just kind of letting that go. Who was going to know? Who saw it? And so he heads on out. But the fact was Rebekah was listening. And remember, Rebekah had a favorite son. That was Jacob. So she's going to help her cunning son find a con that they can pull on dad. So skip down with me to verse 18. So what's going to happen, I'll just tell you the story in between here to save us some time. Rebekah told Jacob, I'll tell you what, go out and kill a goat. And you bring me the meat, I'll start cooking it, I'll make it taste just like Esau's stew. And you are going to need to prepare some other things because, as Jacob said, he's going to know it's not me. My voice isn't him. And they probably found a way of, whisper. Do something to sound like Esau. And he said, but he's going to touch me, and I'm not hairy like Esau. And she said, I'll put the skins of that animal on you. That just tells you Esau must have been really hairy. But anyway, I'll put those skins on you. He'll never know, and you'll smell just like him because they've been outdoors. And so what's Jacob got to lose, right? He goes in to his dad, verse 18 of chapter 27. So he went to his father and said, here, my father. And he said, here I am. Who are you, my son? Jacob said to his father, I am Esau, your firstborn. I have done just as you told me. Please arise, sit and eat of my game, that your soul may bless me. But Isaac said to his son, how is it that you have found it so quickly, my son? And he said, because the Lord your God brought it to me. Then Isaac said to Jacob, please come near, that I may feel you, my son, whether you are really my son Esau or not. So Jacob went near to Isaac his father, and he felt him and said, the voice is Jacob's voice, but the hands are the hands of Esau. And he did not recognize him because his hands were hairy like his brother Esau's hands. So he blessed him. And he said, are you really my son Esau? And he said, I am. He said, "Bring it near to me, and I will eat of my son's game, so that my soul may bless you." So he brought it near to him, and he ate, and he brought him wine, and he drank. Then his father Isaac said to him, "Come near now and kiss me, my son." And he came near and kissed him, and he smelled the smell of his clothing and blessed him and said, "Surely the smell of my son is like the smell of a field, which the Lord has blessed. Therefore may God give you of the dew of heaven, of the fatness of the earth, and plenty of grain and wine. Let peoples serve you, and nations bow down to you. Be master over your brethren, and let your mother's sons bow down to you. Cursed be everyone who curses you, and blessed be those who bless you." Now it happened as soon as Isaac had finished blessing Jacob, and Jacob had scarcely gone out from the presence of Isaac his father, that Esau his brother came in from his hunting. Now the roost is going to be up, because Esau comes in and he prepares a stew and comes into his dad. And he realizes now that what has happened. There's been a trick that's been played. This breaks Isaac's heart, because now his favorite son was not going to get the blessing. As a matter of fact, Esau begs bitterly with great tears, "Don't you have a blessing for me, Dad?" And Isaac's going to say, "Son, I'm sorry. You're going to serve your brother. You know, he tricked us, but I gave the blessing and I can't take it back. It was something that was done and couldn't be taken back." So now they're going to worry. And matter of fact, Esau decides he's going to kill Jacob. He's going to fix this once and for all. So we're going to skip down to chapter 28, and we'll start at verse 10, or actually 1 through 5, 28, 1 through 5. Then Isaac called Jacob and blessed him and charged him and said to him, "You shall not take a wife from the daughters of Canaan. Arise, go to Padan Aram, to the house of Bethuel your mother's father, and take yourself a wife from there of the daughters of Laban, your mother's brother. May God Almighty bless you and make you fruitful and multiply you, that you may be an assembly of peoples, and give you the blessing of Abraham, to you and your descendants with you, that you may inherit the land in which you are a stranger, which God gave to Abraham." So Isaac sent Jacob away, and he went to Padan Aram, to Laban, the son of Bethuel the Syrian, the brother of Rebekah, the mother of Jacob and Esau. So in order to save him and to preserve him, they had to send him away and allow Esau time to cool down. So go to chapter 28, we're going to start with verse 10. Jacob has traveled some way, and he's come to a resting point where he's going to rest for the night. It says, "Now Jacob went out from Beersheba and went toward Haran. So he came to a certain place and stayed there all night, because the sun had set. And he took one of the stones of that place to put it at his head, and he lay down in that place to sleep. Then he dreamed, and behold, a ladder was set up on the earth, and its top reached to heaven. And there were angels of God ascending and descending on it. And behold, the Lord stood above it and said, I am the Lord God of Abraham your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie I will give to you and your descendants. Also your descendants shall be as the dust of the earth. You shall spread abroad to the west and the east, to the north and to the south. And in you and in your seed all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Behold, I am with you and will keep you wherever you go, and will bring you back to this land. For I will not leave you until I have done what I have spoken to you. Then Jacob awoke from his sleep and said, Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. It's interesting to see that this is the grandson of Abraham. You know, he's hearing about God from his granddad. He's hearing about it from his dad. But he's running for his life now. And what really affected him was this dream. And it told him that, you know what, God was here the whole time. I've been going through this. I'm terrified. I'm running. I've connived my way into this. But yet the presence of the Lord was here. And I didn't even know it. And that can happen to us as well. We can be going through life not even realizing that God is there with us all the time. So Jacob's going to arrive at his uncle Laban's house, and this is where he was sent for protection, but also to find a wife. Find a wife there is what his dad had told him to do. He begins a new life. We're going to turn to chapter 29. When he got there, Jacob fell in love with Laban's daughter, Rachel. And he really wanted to marry her in a big, bad way. And so Laban told him, look, if you work for me for 7 years, I will give you Rachel as your wife. That was a deal. That was a deal that Jacob was more than willing to take. Problem was that his uncle Laban was by far a bigger conniver than Jacob ever was. But God was going to use that because, you see, he would one day go back home. And he would be one of these great patriarchs. But Jacob needed to do some changing. And sometimes, just like Jacob, God will let us bump heads with people to get some things knocked out of us, to get us to be able to grow. And that's exactly what was going to happen to Jacob. He was going to find the rug pulled out from under him every step he took with Laban. So the time for the wedding had come, and we're going to go down to Genesis 29, 16 through 18. Now Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the elder was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah's eyes were delicate. This is also could mean weak, is another word for that delicate there. But Rachel was beautiful of form and appearance. Now Jacob loved Rachel, so he said, I will serve you 7 years for Rachel, your younger brother, or your younger daughter. So going down now to verse 25, chapter 29, the wedding has happened. I don't know, they must have got married in the dark, because we get verse 25, it says, so it came to pass in the morning that, behold, it was Leah. He turns over, looks at his bride that he's worked 7 years for, and it's weak-eyed Leah. It's not Rachel, the one that he loved. He got tricked. So he's getting back some of what he paid out. So he said to Laban, what is this you have done to me? Was it not for Rachel that I served you? Why then have you deceived me? And Laban said, it must not be done so in our country to give the younger before the firstborn. Fulfill her week, and we will give you also this one for the service with which you serve me still another 7 years. And Jacob did so and fulfilled her week. So he gave him his daughter Rachel as wife also. So he ends up having to work 14 years. Now, I don't know if Laban allowed Jacob to marry immediately after the 7 years, but he had to work another 7, or if he had to wait the whole 14. But that's a lot of years to commit to working with somebody that's robbing you blind every time you turn around and trying to trick you. So that was a pretty difficult life, but he learned a lot there. So little more time goes on. Everything that Jacob does, God blesses. Just multiplies him like crazy. Laban keeps tricking him, and Jacob finally decides, you know what? I would rather face Esau than continue living with Uncle Laban. It's time to leave. And so they separate ways. If you go to chapter 32, you're going to see that Jacob finds a way that maybe if there's a big fight when they meet with Esau, maybe part of the family will make it. So he separates the family, all of the herds, the servants, everything in half. And he sends one group one way and another group the other way, hoping that if one group runs into Esau and he's angry and slaughters them, the other half will survive. And so he's also going to send a lot of gifts along because he wants Esau to know how much he loves him and how sorry he is. Anything to calm Esau down, to try to make this something that can be sustained. So let's skip down chapter 32. We will go and pick up at verse 24. This is what's going. So the 2 parts of the family have left. They've gone on ahead. But Jacob's going to stay back and try to speak to God one more time. Verse 24, then Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until the breaking of day. Now when he saw that he did not prevail against him, he touched the socket of his hip, and the socket of Jacob's hip was out of joint as he wrestled with him. And he said, let me go, for the day breaks. But he said, I will not let you go unless you bless me. Jacob is desperate. He's facing a desperate situation. Right now, his beautiful wife, Rachel, his family, his kids at this point could be running into a slaughter. God, I need you to bless me, and I'm not going to let you go. Verse 27, so he said to him, what is your name? And he said, Jacob. And he said, your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have struggled with God and with men, and have prevailed. Then Jacob asked, saying, tell me your name, I pray. And he said, why is it that you ask about my name? And he blessed him there. So Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, for I have seen God face to face, and my life is preserved. I find it so interesting. Jacob is struggling. And the Bible tells us here that Jacob said, I saw God face to face and prevailed. You know, was that God himself manifested in some sort of an angelic form or a human form in that moment, and wrestling with him all night. And Jacob does not let go. And I love that Jacob said, tell me your name. Mm-hmm. I need to know your name. Why? Because they never knew what the name of God was back in the Old Testament. They would create names. They called him Jehovah. They would call him Elohim, different names that described what they called God, but they never really knew his name. God didn't say what his name was, but God did not reveal that to Jacob. He literally says, why do you ask me my name? And moves right on, changes the subject. But God changed Jacob's name there to Israel. So he's not the conniver, he's not the liar, the supplanter anymore. Now he's a prince with God and man. So God saw that something had changed in Jacob and was with him. So now Jacob's going to go ahead, and they are going to catch up with Esau. Go to chapter 33, verse 4. And it says, but Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. So during all this time, Jacob had changed a lot, but so had Esau. Mm-hmm. And they were happy to see each other. And matter of fact, for a while, lived right near each other until their herds got so big it was time to separate and go separate ways. But it's a beautiful thing. Here's a great example compared to our last story, where there was forgiveness and reconciliation. And God took care of all of those things when it was time. And God had even told Jacob in his first dream, you're going to come back. This won't be forever. So go with me now to Genesis 37. We've had Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Jacob is going to have 12 sons, and one of them now is Joseph. And we're going to go with the story of Joseph tonight. Most people know a lot about this, but there's some really cool details in here. Okay, so we are picking up at Genesis 37, 1 through 14. Now Jacob dwelt in the land where his father was a stranger, in the land of Canaan. This is the history of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was feeding the flock with his brothers, and the lad was with the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought a bad report to his father, so he's coming to tattle on his brothers. Verse 3, now Israel loved Joseph more than all his children, because he was the son of his old age. Also, he made him a tunic of many colors. So here we go with the sibling rivalry. Parents pick a favorite. All the other kids know they're not it. Joseph's the favorite. His daddy makes him this fancy coat with these beautiful colors on it. None of the other kids get one, just Joseph, who's a little tattler. So it gives you a little idea what Joseph was like. He probably felt pretty entitled compared to the rest of them. Verse 4, but when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him. Now Joseph had a dream, and he told it to his brothers, and they hated him even more. So he said to them, "Please hear this dream which I have dreamed. There we were, binding sheaves in the field. Then behold, my sheaf arose and also stood upright, and indeed your sheaves stood all around and bowed down to my sheaf." Now, you think about this. He's already hated. They can hardly stand him. And he says, I had this dream that basically you all were bowing down to me. Kind of arrogant, right? Not smart for sure. Verse 8. And his brothers said to him, "Shall you indeed reign over us? Or shall you indeed have dominion over us?" So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. Then he dreamed still another dream and told it to his brothers and said, "Look, I have dreamed another dream." I'm sure they just loved when he would say that. "And this time the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars all bowed down to me." So he told it to his father and his brothers, and his father rebuked him and said to him, "What is this dream you have dreamed? Shall your mother and I and your brothers indeed come to bow down to the earth before you?" And his brothers envied him, but his father kept the matter in mind. Then his brothers went to feed their father's flock in Shechem, and Israel said to Joseph, "Are not your brothers feeding the flock? Come, I will send you to them." So he said to him, "Here I am." Then he said to him, "Please go see if it is well with your brothers and well with the flocks, and bring back word to me." So he sent him out of the valley of Hebron, and he went to Shechem. So here goes Joseph again. Gonna go check, see how the brothers are doing, if there's anything to bring a report back to Daddy. So skip with me down to verse 18. Now when they saw, so his brothers see him coming from afar off, even before he came near them, they conspired against him to kill him. Then they said to one another, "Look, this dreamer is coming. Come therefore, let us now kill him and cast him into some pit. Then we shall say some wild beast has devoured him. We shall see what will become of his dreams." But Reuben heard it, and he delivered him out of their hands and said, "Let us not kill him." And Reuben said to them, "Shed no blood, but cast him into this pit which is in the wilderness, and do not lay a hand on him, that he might deliver him out of their hands and bring him back to his father." Reuben's the eldest. He's got the most maturity at this point. And he realizes this thing's going to really go big if he doesn't step in. So he's like, let's just stick him right in this pit, knowing that he would come back later, deliver him back, and probably say, "Dad, you need to keep the kid away," because he's going to get himself killed. So going on, verse 23. So it came to pass when Joseph had come to his brothers that they stripped Joseph of his tunic, the tunic of many colors that was on him. Then they took him and cast him into a pit, and the pit was empty. There was no water in it, and they sat down to eat a meal. Then they lifted their eyes and looked, and there was a company of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead with their camels bearing spices, balm, and myrrh, on their way to carry them down to Egypt. So Judah said to his brothers, "What profit is there if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come and let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother and our flesh." They weren't too minding about killing him earlier and throwing him in a pit and leaving him there, but then, where's the money in that? We could make a profit on this, and then we won't have blood on our hands. And his brothers listened. Then the Midianite traders passed by, so the brothers pulled Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. And then they took Joseph down to Egypt. So instantly, everything has changed. He went from being Daddy's favorite, with the best of everything, the one that could come and tattle on everybody else and Dad would get involved, to all of a sudden being thrown into a pit, hearing his brothers probably within earshot talking about, well, what's the profit in there if we kill him? We can sell him right here and make a buck on him. And he's dragged out of the pit, not to be saved by his brothers, but literally sold, probably roped up and everything right there, and sent off down into Egypt, looking behind him like, I can't believe you guys are letting this happen. I can't believe this. And he knows he'll never have any hope, because there's no way these guys are going to admit to Dad what they did. Nobody's going to come looking for Joseph. So he gets to Egypt, And by the way, his brothers took that pretty coat. They shredded it all up like an animal had killed him, put animal blood all over it, came back and reported to their dad, look, we found this, but we couldn't find a body. So now Isaac thinks, or Jacob rather, thinks this is all over. My favorite son is gone. So time goes on. He's now going to be in Egypt on the auction block. Go to chapter 39. And verses 1 through 6. Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of the Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him down there. And the Lord was with Joseph, and he was a successful man, and he was in the house of his master the Egyptian. Now this had to be humiliating. He's on an auction block. He's being checked for, are you healthy? Are you strong? What type of work would you be good at? And he's literally bartered for and sold. He's come a long way, again, from being daddy's favorite. So he finds himself in Potiphar's house. Verse 3, and his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all he did to prosper in his hand. So Joseph found favor in his sight and served him. Then he made him overseer of his house, and all that he had, he put under his authority. So things are starting to kind of look up. He's a slave. He's far away from home, probably will never see home again, but he wasn't out baking bricks. Could have been worse. He's in one of the nicest homes. He's in an officer's home. So he's got probably a good bed and a room to himself. And not only that, but as Joseph always does, and you'll see this, he just makes lemonade out of lemons. Every time life does that to him. And my mother had a saying, she would always tell us growing up, the cream always rises to the top. And Joseph always did. Whatever situation he found himself in, he rose to the top. So here he is becoming the top. He's over everything that Potiphar has in that house. Verse 5, so it was from that time that he had made him overseer of his house and all that he had, that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. And the blessing of the Lord was on all that he had in the house and in the field. Thus he left all that he had in Joseph's hand, and he did not know what he had except for the bread which he ate. Now Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. Verse 7, and it came to pass after these things that his master's wife cast longing eyes on Joseph, and she said, lie with me. But he refused and said to his master's wife, look, my master does not know what is with me in this house, and he has committed all that he has to my hand. There is no one greater in this house nor I, nor has he kept back anything from me but you, because you are his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? So it was as she spoke to Joseph day by day that he did not heed her to lie with her or to be with her. But it happened about this time when Joseph went into the house to do his work, and none of the men of the house was inside. So she catches him at a time when nobody's there to watch. Nobody's there to see and say what Joseph was really doing. Verse 12, and she caught him by his garment and said, lie with me. But he left his garment in her hand and fled and ran outside. And so it was when she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and fled outside, that she called to the men of her house and spoke to them, saying, see how he has brought into us a Hebrew to mock us. He came in to me to lie with me, and I cried out with a loud voice. And it happened when he heard that I lifted my voice and cried out, that he left his garment with me and fled and went outside. So she kept his garment with her until the master came home. Then she spoke to him with words like these, saying, the Hebrew servant whom you brought to us came in to me to mock me. So it happened as I lifted my voice and cried out, that he left his garment with me and fled outside. So Joseph is now wrongly accused. He had done nothing, but Mrs. Potiphar now has been shown up. At first she thought, well, maybe it's because you see people around, but she gave him that last opportunity, and he rejects her, so much so that he runs out, and she decides, well, if you're going to do that, then I'm just going to scream rape. And that's what she did. And what is a slave to do when the master's wife screams rape? And so that put Joseph in an impossible situation. So he's going to get thrown not just into any prison, but I want you to notice the prison that he gets thrown into. So look at verse 20. Then Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, a place where the king's prisoners were confined, and he was there in the prison. So what's important to note here is God was with Joseph all along this. Not just anybody bought Joseph. God knew what Mrs. Potiphar would do. But God knew when she did that, exactly where Joseph was going to get put. Because Joseph doesn't just go to any dungeon. He goes to the king's prison. And it's important that he goes to the king's prison because there's an appointment for him that's going to set up exactly what God has coming. So what looks horrible right now, that he's in prison, is still God working it out. It's just that Joseph in this moment can't see it at all. Verse 21, but the Lord was with Joseph and showed him mercy, and he gave him favor in sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners who were in the prison. Whatever they did there, it was his doing. The keeper of the prison did not look into anything that was under Joseph's authority, because the Lord was with him, and whatever he did, the Lord made it prosper. Here he goes again. Cream's rising to the top. He's in prison, wrongly accused, but he makes the best of it. He continues to be a godly man, and the Lord elevates him to being to where he's the next in charge. Under the jailer, he's the next in charge. So Pharaoh's cupbearer and his baker were accused of wrongdoing as well. And they end up getting thrown in prison. But because they served the king or the Pharaoh, they were thrown into the king's prison, which is exactly where Joseph was. This is that divine appointment that God had set up that was going to set up everything to come after it. So go with me to chapter 40, and we're going to start at verse 8. And they said to him, they've had dreams, just by the way, they both had dreams that troubled them both. They could obviously tell there was something to these dreams. These were not just your normal average pizza dreams. Something really needed to be interpreted. And so Joseph said, you know what? Talk to me about these dreams. Verse 8, and they said to him, we each have had a dream, and there is no interpreter of it. So Joseph said to them, do not interpretations belong to God? Tell them to me, please. Then the chief butler told his dream to Joseph and said to him, behold, in my dream a vine was before me, and in the vine there were 3 branches, and it was as though it budded. Its blossoms shot forth, and its clusters brought forth ripe grapes. Then Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes and pressed them into Pharaoh's cup, and placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. And Joseph said to him, this is the interpretation of it. The 3 branches are 3 days. Now within 3 days Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your place, and you will put Pharaoh's cup in his hand according to the former manner, when you were his butler. But look at verse 14 and 15, and it just goes to show you that while Joseph was rising to the top and making the best of everything, it didn't mean he had forgotten what was done to him. But remember me when it is well with you, and please show kindness to me. Make mention of me to Pharaoh and get me out of this house. For indeed I was stolen away from the land of the Hebrews, and also I have done nothing here that they should put me into the dungeon. So that's that human side. We can kind of put these guys up on a pedestal and just think they were perfect and they could forgive, forget, move on as if nothing had happened. But the truth is, he remembered. He's sitting in that dungeon realizing there's no attorney that's going to come get him out of this. There's no family that even knows where he is. His brothers don't even really know where he is right now. There's no hope of ever getting out of here. And so I'm sure he had talked to God about it many times. And God, please get me out of here. And he finally sees a way for this to happen. Well, the baker, he hears this interpretation and feels like that's a pretty good interpretation. Let me tell you mine. The only problem was when he told him his dream, come to find out, Joseph says, well, you got the 3-day thing too, but the problem is after 3 days, Pharaoh's going to lift off your head. And the birds are going to eat basically your brains out of your head. I mean, it was, not a good thing to look forward to. So anyway, wouldn't you know, the dreams came true. Exactly as he had prophesied that they would, they came true. Well, the cupbearer, he gets his job back. Does he remember Joseph? No. Forgot him for 2 years. That's a long time. You would think, here's a guy that really helped me, and man, it's just the miracle of this. I had a dream that if I ever had a dream and somebody told me the interpretation and it came true, that would be something I'd never forget, and I would tell all my friends. He told nobody. Nobody knew until 2 more years passed by, and the Lord gives Pharaoh a dream. Now it can sound like God kind of left Joseph in a bad situation for a while, but God had a timeline. There was something he was working on, and all these things had to work together. Chapter 41, verse 14. Then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they brought him quickly out of the dungeon, and he shaved, changed his clothing, and came to Pharaoh. So what Pharaoh's going to tell him is, look, I've had this dream. It's driving me crazy. Matter of fact, he had 2 dreams. I know there's something to this. None of my magicians, none of my wise men can tell me what the meaning is, but I hear you can tell the interpretation of dreams. Because finally the cupbearer says, oh yeah, I knew a guy. Let me finally tell you my story. So now we're going to skip down to verse 15, and we'll read for a while here. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I've had a dream. No one can interpret it, but I have heard it said of you that you can understand a dream to interpret it. So Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, It is not in me. God will give Pharaoh an answer of peace. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, Behold, in my dream I stood on the bank of the river. Suddenly 7 cows came up out of the river, fine looking and fat, and they fed in the meadow. Then behold, 7 other cows came up after them, poor and very ugly and gaunt, such ugliness as I have never seen in all the land of Egypt. And the gaunt and ugly cows ate up the first 7, the fat cows. When they had eaten them up, no one would have known that they had eaten them, for they were just as ugly as at the beginning. So I awoke. Also I saw in my dream, and suddenly 7 heads came up on one stalk, full and good. Then behold, 7 heads withered and thin, and blighted by the east wind, sprang up after them. And the thin heads devoured the 7 good heads. So I told this to the magicians, but there was no one who could explain it to me. Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, The dreams of Pharaoh are one. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good heads are 7 years. The dreams are one. The 7 thin and ugly cows which came up after them are 7 years, and the 7 empty heads blighted by the east wind are 7 years of famine. This is the thing which I have spoken to Pharaoh. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. Indeed, 7 years of great plenty will come throughout all the land of Egypt. But after them 7 years of famine will arise, and all the plenty will be forgotten in the land of Egypt. And the famine will deplete the land. So the plenty will not be known in the land because of the famine following, for it will be very severe. And the dream was repeated to Pharaoh twice, because the thing is established by God, and God will shortly bring it to pass. Now therefore let Pharaoh select a discerning and wise man, and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh do this, and let him appoint officers over the land to collect 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt in the 7 plentiful years, and let them gather all the food of those good years that are coming, and store up grain under the authority of Pharaoh, and let them keep food in the cities. Then that food shall be as a reserve for the land for the 7 years of famine which shall be in the land of Egypt. that the land may not perish during the famine. So the advice was good in the eyes of Pharaoh and in the eyes of all his servants. And Pharaoh said to his servants, "Can we find such a one as this, a man in whom is the Spirit of God?" Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Inasmuch as God has shown you all this, there is no one as discerning and wise as you. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall be ruled according to your word. Only in regard to the throne will I be greater than you." That's pretty amazing. So he not only provides the interpretation, but he provides the escape, the way to survive this. And Pharaoh realizes his wisdom. So if you think, poor Joseph, he'd been thrown into a pit after being daddy's favorite, pulled out of the pit not to be saved, but to be sold into slavery. He's on the auction block, bought by Potiphar, ends up in a house that's pretty nice considering where he could have been, but he's wrongly accused. Ends up in the king's prison. He's elevated to just under the jailer. It's as good as it can be, but he's still in prison. Interprets a dream hoping it'll get him out, but that wasn't for 2 more years after all of this. But now, after all of that, in an instant, he's put into second in command. Only to Pharaoh is he second over all of Egypt, the mightiest nation in the world at that time. That's just an incredible roller coaster when you think about what that young man went through for so long. But God had a plan for all of this, and we're going to see that come to be. So we're going over to chapter 42. Joseph is now, he's now 39 years old. It's been 22 years since he was sold. So sometimes we think of that story and we think of this as all happening, maybe 5 years or whatever. This has been 22 years of being in Egypt with nobody knowing where he is and no hope of getting out of the situation. He's lost his youth. Remember, we last saw him at 17. He's 39 now. Chapter 42, verse 13. Chapter 42, verse 13 says, and actually I'm going to back up just a little bit, go through 1 through 9. Okay, chapter 42, we're going to start in verse 1. When Jacob saw that there was grain in Egypt, Jacob said to his sons, "Why do you look at one another?" So what's happened now is that famine is hit. They've had their 7 years of plenty. Egypt has done exactly what Joseph ordered that they do. They've stored up enough food, enough grain that they could outlast that 7 years of famine. Now the famine's come, but it doesn't just hit Egypt. It's hitting the whole world around there, which includes Canaan, where his father and the rest of his family is living. And they come to a place now where they need food. And they've heard Egypt has food that they would sell. And so now Jacob's going to send his sons, all but the youngest, which is Benjamin, down into Egypt to get food. And that's where we're going to find ourselves. So verse 2, and he said, "Indeed, I have heard there is grain in Egypt. Go down to that place and buy for us there, that we may live and not die." So Joseph's 10 brothers went down to buy grain in Egypt. But Jacob did not send Joseph's brother Benjamin with his brothers, for he said, "Lest some calamity befall him." Well, makes you wonder, why didn't he trust him? But the other interesting thing that I want you to know is that, remember we talked about how Jacob had, Rachel was his favorite wife. He'd worked 14 years for her. And Leah was the not so favorite. Well, Leah could have kids like you wouldn't believe. And then he had 2 other wives that also had children. But Rachel was barren, just like Sarah was before her, just like Rebecca, her mother-in-law, was. Rachel was barren. And finally, years down the road, God opened her womb and gave her 2 children. The first was Joseph. That's why these kids were such favorites of Jacob. And the last was Benjamin. She had 2 sons, and unfortunately she died in childbirth with Benjamin. So all Jacob had left of Rachel, his beloved, was Joseph and Benjamin. And then when Joseph was taken and sold, all he had left of her was Benjamin. So there's no way he's trusting those brothers with Benjamin. Because I'm wondering if in the back of his mind, he didn't have a little bit of doubt over what really happened to Joseph. Going on to verse 5, and the sons of Israel went to buy grain among those who journeyed, for the famine was in the land of Canaan. Now Joseph was governor over the land, and it was he who sold to all the people of the land. And Joseph's brothers came and bowed down before him with their faces to the earth. Joseph saw his brothers and recognized them, but he acted as a stranger to them and spoke roughly to them. Then he said to them, "Where do you come from?" And they said, "From the land of Canaan to buy food." So Joseph recognized his brothers, but they did not recognize him. Then Joseph remembered the dreams which he had dreamed about them, and he said to them, "You are spies. You have come to see the nakedness of the land." So we've got to remember, Joseph here looked a lot different. 22 years had passed. He's 39 compared to 17. But also, he is dressed like an Egyptian. Just like Pharaoh would have looked is a lot how Joseph would have looked. He probably would have had all that paint marking on him and the gold and everything. And he spoke in the Egyptian language. So his brothers had no idea who this was. And Joseph, very interestingly, doesn't reveal himself right away. And we're going to see some reasons why that might have been. So he's going to play a little bit of a game with them, but he's got his reasons. Go with me now. We're going to skip down to verse 13. And they said, "Your servants are 12 brothers, the sons of one man in the land of Canaan. And in fact, the youngest is with our father today, and one is no more." Well, that told Joseph everything he wanted to know. He wanted to find out, did you kill my brother? Because there's one more of us left. Nope, Benjamin's still alive, and he's with his father today, which means daddy's still alive. That was really important. So now going down to verse 19, "If you are honest men, let one of your brothers be confined to your prison house. But you go and carry grain for the famine of your houses, and bring your youngest brother to me, so your words will be verified, and you shall not die." And they did so. Then they said to one another, "We are truly guilty concerning our brother, for we saw the anguish of his soul when he pleaded with us, and we would not hear. Therefore this distress has come upon us." And Reuben answered them, saying, "Did I not speak to you, saying, 'Do not sin against the boy'? And you would not listen. Therefore, behold, his blood is now required of us." But they did not know that Joseph understood them, for he spoke to them through an interpreter. And he turned himself away from them and wept. Then he returned to them again and talked with them. And he took Simeon from them and bound him before their eyes. Then Joseph gave a command to fill their sacks with grain, to restore every man's money to his sack, and to give them provisions for the journey. Thus he did for them. So they loaded their donkeys with the grain and departed from there. But as one of them opened his sack to give his donkey feed at the encampment, he saw his money, and there it was in the mouth of the sack. Well, this guy was Joseph, but they didn't know it was the only one that could give them food during this famine. They've already lost Simeon because the guy didn't seem to trust them. Simeon's in jail. And now the money that they had paid for this food is back in their sack, so it looks like they robbed Egypt. What are they going to do? And they've been told, don't come back without your brother. Now in Joseph's mind, remember the first dream, 11 brothers were bowing. On this trip, only 10 brothers were there. So even though they were bowing, that was not fulfilling dream number 1. Benjamin had to be there. That's what Joseph's plan was. I'm going to see these dreams fulfilled just the way God gave them to me. So he puts that money back there. They're worried to death about it. How could they ever go back? All they could do was hope that the famine would be over soon and just leave Simeon to rot in the prison. That was the best that they could hope for. So time goes on, and they're going to run out of food again. We're going to go over to chapter 43, starting with verse 1. Now the famine was severe in the land, and it came to pass when they had eaten up the grain which they had bought from Egypt, that their father said to them, Go back and buy us a little food. But Judah spoke to him, saying, The man solemnly warned us, saying, You shall not see my face unless your brother is with you. If you send our brother with us, we will go down and buy food. But if you will not send him, we will not go down. For the man said to us, You shall not see my face unless your brother is with you. And Israel said, Why did you deal so wrongfully with me as to tell the man whether you still had another brother? It's like, why couldn't you guys keep your mouth shut? But they said, The man asked us pointedly about ourselves and our family, saying, Is your father still alive? Have you another brother? And we told him according to these words. Could we possibly have known that he would say, Bring your brother down? So then Judah said to Israel his father, Send the lad with me, and we will arise and go, that we may live and not die, both we and you, and also our little ones. I myself will be surety for him. From my hand you shall require him. If I do not bring him back to you and set him before you, then let me bear the blame forever. So remember, when Joseph was in that pit, who was it that said, What profit is it for us to leave him in that pit? We could make a buck and not have blood. It was Judah. It was Judah, right? Reuben was the one that was going to try to hide him away. And that's why he said, I told you, right? But Judah was the one that said, let's make a profit off him. Let's sell him. And now you've got Judah pleading, look, I'll take care of Benjamin, I promise. Well, Jacob realizes the only way they're going to get food and the only way that their family is going to survive is he has to let Benjamin go. And Judah promises with his life he will take care of him and bring him back. So they brought not only the money they would need to buy the food that they would need in the future, but they brought money to pay for what was in their sacks the last time, should that be asked, and they wanted to offer that. And they also brought a gift for the man they didn't realize was Joseph, just to try to make nice, to do the best they could. Skipping down to chapter 43, verse 15. So the men took that present and Benjamin, and they took double the money in their hand, and arose and went down to Egypt, and they stood before Joseph. When Joseph saw Benjamin with them, he said to the steward of his house, Take these men to my home, and slaughter an animal and make ready, for these men will dine with me at noon. Then the man did as Joseph ordered, and the man brought the men into Joseph's house. Now the men were afraid because they were brought into Joseph's house, and they said, Is it because of the money which was returned in our sacks the first time that we are brought in, so that we may make a case against us and seize us to take us as slaves with our donkeys? When they drew near to the steward of Joseph's house, they talked with him at the door of the house and said, O sir, we indeed came down the first time to buy food, but it happened when we came to our encampment that we opened our sacks, and there each man's money was in the mouth of his sack, our money in full weight. So we have brought it back in our hand, and we have brought down other money in our hands to buy food. We do not know who put our money back in our sacks. But he said, Peace be with you, do not be afraid. Your God and the God of your father has given you treasure in your sacks. I had your money. Then he brought out Simeon to them. That had to be very worrying to get brought to this man's home. I mean, it'd be like us going to Washington, D.C. to buy something and get brought to the vice president's house. It'd be like, okay, what? What's up? Something's unusual with this, right? So skipping down now to verse 26. And when Joseph came home, they brought him the present which was in their hand into the house and bowed down before him to the earth. Then he asked